I kind of just got dizzy and from just that sound, and I was just looking around. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. And then I look in the distance, and there's a procession of beings that look like a predator. Like, light bending around them.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of Odd Virginia. My name's Alex Koskin. I'll be your host for the show. Tonight, we've got a young man named Michael on the line over Discord. I really enjoyed talking to Michael, but if his story sounds a little bit familiar, it's because I already read the story on episode 9, More Stories from Reddit. This was a story about the young man who moved to Williamsburg and stumbled upon a swamp, and he had really strange neighbors. Well, I had messaged Michael about sharing his story on the show back in October, and it was a secondary account that he had posted it on, so it took until about now for him to see that message and respond to me, and he said he'd be willing to come on. So I said we could rehash that story, and he can tell us whatever else he's got. And boy, he did have a lot of stories. Now, not everything takes place in Virginia, but I already had him on the line, and I wanted to hear those stories, and I'm sure you do too. So sit tight, and we'll get to Michael's interview in just a moment. But before we do, I want to go over just a couple of quick announcements. First of all, I've just started hosting the show on Rumble as well, so if you prefer to use that platform to listen to your podcasts or watch videos, we will now be available on Rumble. Seems like it's an increasingly popular platform, so I thought, why not? The more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. And also, I'll be uploading a little bit of extra content on February 1st. Now, this is not an episode of Odd Virginia, but about 3 years ago, I was wondering what I was going to do with this little vocal studio that I have here at my house. And I was playing around with ideas and decided, hey, why not try recording a audio narration? So what I did is recorded a narration of the Call of Cthulhu, and it's just been sitting on my hard drive for about 3 years now. So I figured, hey, why not put it out there? It's not the best narration of Call of Cthulhu. It's also not the worst. So if you prefer to hear me read it over some other guy, you should check it out. It'll be up on February 1st. And the reason I chose February is because the Call of Cthulhu was originally released in February of 1928 in the magazine Weird Tales. And one last thing before we get to the interview of the evening. On our last episode, there was a bit of a technical problem with audio corruption. And so if you heard some odd static noises or the audio drop out, the audio corrupted during one of my saves. And unfortunately, I just wasn't able to correct that or get that stuff back. So the audio is what it is. It really didn't harm the broadcast in any way, but I did want to apologize for that. And lastly, Odd Virginia is a show all about the people of Virginia and the weird, strange things that they encounter within the borders of the Commonwealth. So if you have a story that you'd like to share on the show, you can drop us an email at oddvirginia@protonmail.com. That's oddvirginia@protonmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And as always,
we're ready to believe you.
all right, tonight on the show, we have a special guest named of Michael. Michael, I want to thank you for coming out tonight and sharing your stories with us. I actually did read your story that you posted on Reddit on episode 9, and believe it or not, everyone, I messaged him back in October, and it was a secondary Reddit account, so he's responded, and now we've got him on the show, so we're going to rehash a little bit about that, but he's got more to share with us. So, Michael, if you'd like to, just give us a quick bio on yourself for a little bit of familiarity.
Okay. Well, I'm Michael. I live presently in the Panhandle region of Texas. Previously, I've lived in many, many places. A short time in England as a kid, but mainly in Virginia, in the Fredericksburg area, Stafford area, and in Williamsburg. I also spent a good amount of time in Harrisonburg, although that was for probably another short stint, less than a year. I also spent a good amount of my youth, about 7 years, in Alaska, in Fairbanks and in Juneau. So, and then a lot of it also was in the Poconos, and that's been the main places I've lived.
Jeez, you've been all over.
Yeah, my dad is with the Army Corps of Engineers, so
that makes sense.
It's required a lot of moves. That's what happened.
So, what years approximately were you living in Virginia?
Let's see. I remember it from how old I am or was at the time. So That was, I guess, I'm 28 now, so it was around. I remember I was there for the blizzard of 2000. So we had just moved from Oregon, so I was there from 1999 to about 2001, and then we left to Juneau, uh, and then we came back, and I was there from about 2004 to 2006 or something. Then we left again, and then we came back, and so yeah, it's I've been the last time I lived in Virginia was 2017, but I was there for about a total of 9 years within that span.
Okay, that's pretty recent as well.
Yeah.
So the story that I read on Reddit was when you moved to Williamsburg, and
Mhm.
I've got to say that that story was super intriguing. It was well written, first of all. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I guess a brief synopsis I should share just as a rehashing is you moved to Williamsburg and you were new to this neighborhood and you were kind of a loner, right?
Well, I always have been, because all the moves, it's hard to make friends, But 2011 is when this happened.
Okay. And you explored the woods as any loner would. Even if you're not a loner, the woods are just intriguing.
Yeah.
You went out there and you found a swamp with some swans and bones.
Yes, littered around the body of the swamp, and I mean, I'm sure you know that swamps are not an uncommon thing in Williamsburg, but
It's kind of terrifyingly picturesque. Well, I'm not too terribly familiar with Williamsburg. I've driven into it, or rather by it, a few times, especially on the way to the beach for vacation every summer. And I've explored colonial Williamsburg, tourist traps, but I'm not really familiar with Williamsburg.
well, it's not too far from Virginia Beach, and it's not too far from really the Atlantic Ocean. So you have some of the drainage from the inland tends to collect out around that area. Now Jamestown and Williamsburg, anything near where the first colonists settled, actually, because it's so near to the sea. So there's a lot of swamps there and really deep forests.
Yeah, so along the coast there is a lot of like, kind of marshland, tall grasses, reeds, and 6 inches of water. But in Williamsburg, that's not something I've seen because, of course, colonial Williamsburg was all settled on rather firm ground because why not? But yeah, the place that you went was sort of more outskirts.
It's definitely about maybe 45 minutes or maybe yeah 45 minutes west of Colonial.
Okay, oh, that's a good bit away actually. So
Well, not 45. I mean, so it would take 45, but it's Colonial Williamsburg, like towards that region. It's this was on the other side of the town. It was still Williamsburg, but it's by that Target that's on Monticello. I believe that's about 30 minutes maybe then from one town to the side of the town to the other. It's on the complete opposite side of Colonial Williamsburg.
and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will get that reference exactly. But you saw this weird swamp with swans and bones, and you ended up taking home a what was it? A skull?
Yes, it was a deer school. I mean, I was a kid and deer school's cool. So
Deer skulls are totally cool. Yeah, but that when you brought that home, it started kind of activating poltergeist activity, as far as I remember.
yeah, so well, it wasn't really like I'd say outright poltergeist at first. It was a feeling of dread. It wasn't normal because I had brought home bones before. I My parents never really had a big objection to it, as long as I wasn't the one killing the animals. Like I just scavenge a bone or something, take it home because it was cool, and I'd draw on it or paint it or whatever. But when I got when I brought that home, like almost instantly, that house it felt like there was just a looming sense. And there was a little bit of that beforehand, but the fact that I brought the skull home seemed to activate it more so. And I put it on my dresser. And then in a few days, it got so bad because I could hardly sleep because it felt like things were standing over me or watching me and stuff like that. And so much so that my family picked up on the whole thing. Um, so I did a seance in my room, which I was super Christian at the time, and this was totally out of character, but it was gnawing at me, this whole dread feeling, and that's when the poltergeist activity started.
Okay, so the first you just felt a presence, and then after using the seance, that's when you started seeing things happen.
Yes, and it wasn't over a time period, it was all at once. The
Okay.
radio turned on, the television turned on, there were knocks on the walls, and, the skull fell off my dresser on its own, just as soon as I did
That's quite a bit of stuff.
it. Yeah, all at once. It
Yeah,
was a little terrifying.
that's yeah, it would definitely be terrifying. But the thing that really struck me is odd or weird, and I don't know how it was in the first person perspective because I wasn't there to experience it. But the neighbors,
Yes, that they were, they would be, like, sitting out in front of as soon as I brought that skull home on the way home, they were sitting out front of their, like, porches or driveways, just kinda ogling me as I was walking back. It was very odd. Just every single house had a person out front, and then when they came over, while I had the skull there, part of what gave me the feeling of dread was the fact that every single person that was welcoming my family to the neighborhood, which was kind of out of character anyway. Out of all the places we moved, this town or this little neighborhood seemed to want to like invite my family into the neighborhood with food and cookies and stuff. And every time they'd come in, they'd ask me, "Have you seen the swans?" Like, because I had poison ivy on my face, so they knew I had been to the woods, and they asked if I had seen the swans, and I said, "Yeah, of course. That's really cool. I'm surprised you know about it." The first time. And then the second and third time, it started to freak me and my folks out. Like, they were like, "How do so many people know about what's in the woods?"
yeah. According to your post, it seemed like they were kind of coordinated. One day, and then a family came, and the next day another family came, and then so on and so forth. It just kept happening like that. And this was, to be honest with you, this was the thing that got me with the post when we were reading it on episode 9. I was like, dude, this sounds like a Goosebump episode. It's almost too weird to be real.
Yeah, well, I mean, from my point of view, it certainly I thought I was losing my mind. I mean, it was so bizarre that this kept happening, and my folks noticed it, although they're a lot more dismissive of subtleties than me. They just said that's really weird that all these people know about what's you said a half an hour in the woods. And I was like, yeah, it's a half an hour in, and it's very thick woods to get to that place. But I was going there because I was scoping out the area around my house, you know?
Yeah, and you would expect parents especially to be dismissive of anything that's a little bit out of the ordinary because they're supposed to be sort of the foundation, the rock of the family,
Yeah, a question of one's safety as a kid. That I mean,
Exactly.
they absolutely want to be dismissive of it. I totally understood it.
So you said that there was a neighbor that you actually had become friends with, and you guys fell out after a while?
Well, it wasn't that we had become friends. She friended me on Facebook,
Okay.
like out of the blue,
So it
and
wasn't like a legitimate friendship, it was more of just like a, "Hey, you're in my neighborhood, I'm gonna go ahead and
had you on Facebook. It was 2011, so that
as
wasn't
one
so.
does."
Yeah, in 2011, right. So, like, you just kinda collect Facebook friends based on people you met at that time. This was a lot before Facebook became kind of the current, rocky ground that it is. But she added me on Facebook, and it was particularly odd because I guess she asked every once in a while what I had seen in the woods. And then after I had ended up, having to leave that, neighborhood, my family had, she unfriended me instantly.
That's so odd.
Yeah, I don't understand that whole scenario, but, the reason we ended up leaving is because, I mean, you talked about this on your previous podcast, correct?
Yeah, we on our episode 9, we read the story and we had a bit of a discussion. I had a co-host. That was the first time I've had a co-host.
Oh, neat. Awesome. So let me think of how to phrase this. So I had brought the skull back, and I had gone out on an island that was in the swamp. I don't know why. I don't remember actually going to it. I was just there, and I kind of like was like in a trance like state. And I like I said, it's almost as if the swamp itself had like a toxic gas, but there were swans on it, so they were fine. But and they were real because they were moving and ducking their head in the water and stuff. So I walked back and I almost sunk. I sunk into the mud, but I pulled myself out using a tree limb. The bottom half of my body was submerged in mud as I was walking back. It was like it looked like it was solid ground, and it must have been because I got out that way. So there was no other way to go out than that. But then the ground gave way as soon as I would try to walk back. I don't understand anything about it, but
Well,
as I pulled,
presumably the ground was very wet and just was able to give way.
yeah, maybe that could have been it. But yeah, I don't know how I got out on that island. Only to head back and then just sink. You know what I mean? It was a very small path of land. It was very weird.
Yeah,
But
that is very weird. I'm not gonna lie, but it's sort of the idea of the final straw on the camel's back. You could have stepped on it one too many times.
yeah, right, exactly. So I ended up I walked home from there, and after I dropped the skull back off where I found it, the neighbors were again watching. Now they don't usually do that. Like it was like just knowing that I was in the woods seemed to wig them out. But I got home, I was half covered in mud. My parents asked why, and I told them I slipped and fell in some mud. And then the next day, the landlord had a mental breakdown, said he's not going to make any more repairs that my parents were requesting because it was a bit of a rundown house. And he told us that if we have a problem with it, he'll let us out of the lease right now, which he did. And we left. But like it was that whole scenario was extremely odd.
Yeah, no, the entire thing is very odd. And still with the neighbors, I think is an incredibly odd part. Like I understand if you go to a swamp and you grab a bone, you bring it home. For whatever reason, there might be something attached to it and causing a little bit of supernatural havoc per se in your house. But what do you think was going on with the neighborhood, the people who living in that neighborhood? Because it seems like there was a coordinated effort to sort of pry at you a little bit, and it also seems like I don't know. Do you think that they were like some part of some sort of cult, that they were just in the know on something that you didn't know about? What did you think their actions told?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I collect folklore and stuff like that, and I had come to know later because I'm a polytheist, so I study a lot of the old pagan religions, and in Gaelic religions, they usually, and you can find this, they have bog bodies in our archaeology of the British Isles, and in some places in Scandinavia where they would sink their offerings into swamps. So I had thought maybe that was something to do with it, and then caused me to think back about it. But um, honestly, it could have just been that there was a lot of poaching going on in that neighborhood, and they might have been a group of poachers and didn't like the fact that I found out where they were throwing all their dead deer. It could be that too. I mean, I have no clue.
That's an incredibly astute rationalization, I'd say, but it doesn't seem likely. You've got my mind going in the direction right now of boggins. You know what boggins are, yeah.
I know what a boggart is, but what is a boggin?
A boggin in Gaelish tradition is a creature that would drag someone into a bog.
No, I don't think I'm familiar with that particular I know there's a similar being, and there's also like Kelpie and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Like the bog horses that would do the same kind of thing.
The
That's
reason I
interesting.
bring it up is because in Virginia, this is actually a very, very prominent theme. Because we think the etymology of the term wood booger, which is a name for Sasquatch, comes from the
Hmm.
term boggin from Old Ireland.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And boggart is kind of the same thing. It's just kind of like a goblin or a boogeyman, which
Yeah.
is same origin.
Yeah,
Probably.
it all kind of comes around to that same circle as of the boogeyman, the booger, the wood booger, the boggin. It's all sort of in that same etymology. But this isn't a show about etymology. I just love it. It strikes me as very fun and fanciful. I was curious about other stories, and I know you've had some that are outside of Virginia, which is totally fine because I'm here to get your stories. I just want to know if you do have any others that were within Virginia. You said you've lived in Harrisonburg. That's like 20 minutes from me.
Yeah, but at the time in my life that I was there, I was less into exercise and exploration and more into booze. So I
Mm,
didn't go out much during that time.
can relate. Can relate.
Yeah, that was in 2017, late 2016. So I haven't been drinking as much, so I'm back out, but I haven't seen anything as odd in Texas as I've seen in any of the other places with the deep forest.
And where was it? You said you live in Texas.
I live in Amarillo, and like I said, the only odd thing that I know is north of town. There's been reports of cattle mutilations, and it looks like it's not human, but I mean that's always happened in this region, and
No,
people
it's Amarillo in West or East Texas.
West Texas.
Okay, because Texas is absolutely huge, and in East Texas, you get a lot of reports of Sasquatch and Dogman.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you know how Texas has like that weird square at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amarillo's right in the center of that.
Okay,
Yeah. So that's where I live.
and that's close to let me think, Oklahoma and
New Mexico.
New Mexico, right?
So, like I said, New Mexico is also famous for such animal mutilations and chupacabras and skinwalkers and all that. Like it's well known.
Isn't it?
Yeah. So it's I'm about half an hour from New Mexico.
Well, do you have any other stories from Virginia?
Ah, I don't. I honestly
That
that
was the
was the
one.
only that was the one, but it's probably the weirdest story I have to tell.
But you also mentioned the other day about seeing a procession of invisible beings or cloaked beings, probably because you could perceive that they were there, right?
Yeah, and that was in Pennsylvania. That was up in the Poconos.
Close
Um,
enough.
yeah, close enough. So okay, I will tell you this is the thing that when I learned about uh the Fae, the she, which is the Gaelic term for it, um, uh, I had had an experience in Juneau, Alaska, and in the Poconos, I've had a few, and so I can start with the Juneau one maybe because that's the earliest one that I've had.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I was 9, and my dad tried to get us out of the house because Juneau's always rainy. It's a rainforest, Arctic rainforest. So they very rarely have a day where there's not rain. But on one day it was sunny, and he wanted to make us exercise. So he took us out to a trail, and forgot the name of the trail, but it's still there. Uh, there was back in the 70s they made this trail, and it really isn't well maintained. I mean, it's maintained enough, but it's in the deepest part of the old growth forest in Alaska, and that part of Alaska, because Juneau's an island, and it's by the old Kmart that was there. So we went into the woods, about 30 minutes, and there was a clearing. It was a perfectly circular clearing of trees, and they all seemed like there's a wood blight in Alaska, and it was kind of like that, except the trees are still kind of alive. They were just colorless, like everything was black and brown, and that's it. But the trees were still alive. Like they still had, you know, they didn't seem dry. anything that you saw that was like a crack in the tree still had green underneath the bark. It was really weird. I don't know how to describe it, but my dad and my sister and me, we went into it, and we were following trail markers, of course, and it seemed like a pretty well marked trail, but we tried to leave, and not 5 minutes after, or 15 minutes probably after walking out, we ended up looping back to
Hmm.
that area, and no matter which direction we went, we always entered back in the same way. So it was just like we could not escape that clearing, no matter what we did.
Were there
And
a
we
lot of branches on the trail?
branches, yeah, yeah, absolutely, everywhere. Like it looked like a bunch of trees have been cut down, but they're also standing trees. So it was weird.
I mean, like on the off the trail itself, were there diverting paths everywhere you went?
Yeah, yeah, there were, but when we tried to leave back the way we came, we ended up coming back to it as well. It was very odd. Um, and everything, like, I knew we had passed this certain point, because I had made the statement, because I was looking for landmarks and stuff like that. And I said to my dad, I was like, we passed this tree like 5 times already. And this is really close to the road. I don't know why this is happening. He didn't either. We were stuck there for 3 hours just walking in circles. And then I just started laughing. And I was like, "This is the weirdest shit I've ever seen." And as soon as I did, we tried to leave back the way we came again, and we were out. Just and not more than half an hour from the road, like it was when we first entered that circle.
That's so strange.
It was strange, but the thing is that when we left, even though we went back on the trail that we came, we were actually about a mile from where we parked and entered.
1 mile.
A mile. Yes, we had to walk a mile up the road. Like, we went back and we got back to the road, but we entered a mile away from where that was. And I confirmed this on Google Maps because I remember where we came out. It was so weird, and
That's
none
very
of that
weird.
makes. But my dad was freaked out, like, and he still doesn't like to talk about it to this
Yeah,
day.
I would be too, to be honest. I mean, especially if you know where you're going.
Right, and with trail markers, like I said, that it didn't seem like they were marking all the trees. It just seemed like there was some glitch in the matrix, you know?
Yeah,
And
can't explain that whatsoever.
well, like I said, when I started to study for my religion, it's talked about being pixie led,
Yeah,
and a lot.
as an avid hiker, I've been down certain trails multiple times, and it's super easy to find your way out easily. Like top, you've got your topographical markers and you've got your trail markers. Things don't get complicated.
Right, exactly. And so it didn't make any sense. But being pixie led, it's basically like it's supposedly a joke by the Fae to make you think that you're going one direction, but it's actually like mixing up the very fabric of time and space, so that and the only way to get out of it is to laugh at it because it's a joke.
It is a joke, and the these whole forest spirits. What do you really think about what they're trying to do? Like, is it all just a joke to them? What's going on with them?
I don't know. I'm not a forest spirit.
You're not.
No, I'm not.
That I know for sure. But there's people who get caught in time slips who might end up being gone for like 4 days with little people, or in your circumstance, you're just lost for maybe an hour or something like that.
We were lost for 3, but yeah, that's the little people is the global term for that phenomenon of Fae.
But they're not all little, are they?
No, no, not at all. And that's like the Germanic cultures had elves. You could argue like Tengu. for example, in Japan,
Okay.
very similar. They're
And
like
those are
crow
the bird
spirits.
folk. Yeah.
Yep, yeah, that live in the woods and leads travelers in circles. Even though they look like they know the trail really well, they get missing and all that. The thing that I was going to say was interesting is speaking. We had talked about David Paulides. I always
Politis.
Paulides. I mess up his name all the time. We talked about him earlier, and he talked about boulder fields
Mm-hmm.
once.
Yeah, the granite.
Yeah. Well, so that's the two times that or the two geographical formations that have caused these issues. And historically and in folklore, those are usually the two geographical formations that are associated.
It,
Circles of dead things or of mushrooms or really any circles of any kind.
yeah,
And
I'm not
rocks.
familiar with all of it, but I do know that in Nordic regions, large granite boulders are kind of revered in a way.
And it is in the Shinto religions too. When I would the reason I know a lot about that is because I took about 3 years of Japanese, and my teacher would explain the Shinto religion quite a bit, and said that there were every time there'd be an unnaturally large rock out away from everything else, they'd refer to it as a god.
Ah,
But it's animistic, and
yeah, I
I
was about to
recognize.
ask if you could surmise that as sort of an animistic religion.
Absolutely. It's an animistic polytheistic religion, which is what the same as the Germanic religions and Gaelic religions, even though they have different cultures and gods, you could all blanket it by the term of animistic polytheism.
Well, sure,
And
you could say that they just have different names for the same gods.
you could, yeah. I like to think that they're separate because there's certain gods that have like some associations of sharing the same ones, and then there's other gods and other cultures that fulfill those same associations with gods that have different, like they mix everything up. So as long as like all the associations are covered by each culture's gods, but different gods, like the god of fire may also be the god of smithing in one culture, but while the god of fire is also the god of money in another culture.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
it's
I understand. I definitely understand that, but at the same time, these are all human interpolations of what could be universal.
I suppose so. Like I said, as a hard polytheist, which is the religion that I follow, if you look back in the tales, it says that we've met our gods and actually fought against them. In like the story of the sons of Mill, that sort of thing. So I don't know if it's really human interpolations because I've had odd experiences within my own religion at rituals and the such like that. You can almost tell a different character with each being in the interactions that occur.
Very
But
interesting.
yeah, but I can tell you about the Pocono stories if you'd like.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, this is what I was really wanting to get to.
All right. Well, I wanted to tell the Juno story as a precursor because I recognized it
Oh, geez, I
as
love it though.
yeah. Well, I recognized it as happening again when I went to the Poconos because there was a hill that I had climbed, and this was the first issue that happened in the Poconos. Because, like I said, I always go to the woods to scope out the land, and we were on a game preserve. So it was like and it's a massive game preserve in Monroe County, in Pennsylvania, in the Poconos, and my backyard was that game preserve. So I was allowed to go on. I'm just not allowed to kill anything, obviously, but I'm never much a hunter myself anyway. I go into the woods alone, obviously, and there's black bears there, so I have a sword. I didn't have a gun at the time because I was a kid, you know? I mean, I was 16, 17. Um,
Just being tends to scare a black bear off.
yeah, they're a little wimpy.
They are.
Um, but uh,
Non-confrontational, I think, is a better term because they could beat me up a hill, no problem.
yeah, exactly. And uh, actually, earlier that year, before I had moved to Pennsylvania, a what was it, a 76-year-old man killed a black bear with a 3-inch pocket knife that attacked him.
Wow.
So I was like, if he can do that, I got a sword. But Um, so I went into the woods and I started climbing a hill, and just to because I was like about 2.5 hours into this game preserve, and I had gotten a lot better at not getting lost in the woods by this point. But there was a hill, and I climbed the hill to try to get a vantage point just to see, landmarks. And I saw a landmark that I had passed before. Go to climb down the hill, and halfway down the hill, I'm walking forward, and suddenly I'm back on the overlook at the top of the hill. And I did this again several times, and it was just like before. And there's rock piles there, so that freaked me out for one. And then I did what I had done as a kid, and I was just like, can you please let me out? I'll give you some water." And I put some water on the ground, like poured it out, and I was able to get out. But like it was very bizarre. Uh, and the other thing that's interesting about that part is there's massive lines of boulders that were intentionally placed, like they meet at right angles and stuff like that.
Almost like a
And
wall.
there's yeah, walls, and there's cairns, but there's no evidence of farming in the area. So it's like, who built these walls? You know? And
Mhm.
why are there massive cairns of stone? And they're still trying to figure that out to this day. They're actually doing a study right now in that area on these cairns, trying to chronicle them or catalog them. Like cairn is big pile of rocks and
Yeah.
in like a pyramid shape, and they're ancient.
And
They're
there is an ancient history of the entirety of the North American region that is not very well known yet. The whole Clovis first ideology has been toppled. There is a culture that dates way back beyond the Ice Age that we don't really know much about.
Yeah, there is. There yeah, so I had heard about that, the early Ice Age tribes in the US. And um there's also something interesting in Pennsylvania. We found well, not me, but I mean like Pennsylvanian archaeologists, they found Futhark, Elder Futhark, which is like the Viking writing on the stones. Um and Ogham, which is the Irish writing, ancient Irish alphabet on the stones as well, in various places within Pennsylvania in the Northeast. So I don't think that they just stopped at Victoria Island or wherever Vinland was supposed to be. I think they went further inland.
And these are the ancient explorers, presumably, that came after the Ice Age.
Yes,
Y-
yeah, that had been there. So I'm thinking that it's not just the Ice Age people. It wasn't just the Native Americans. I'm thinking there's a whole bunch of cultures that knew about the U.S. and the Western continent, and just either died there and they were thought to have gone missing, or stuff like that, because there's so many different cultures, artifacts in North America that are ancient.
Oh yes, and this is something that comes up a lot these days right now, with archaeology and anthropology relating to ancient Egypt, where they had much larger scope of influence than one would have ever thought. But when you look at certain engravings in the North American region, you'll find that there are many surprising things. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating.
Absolutely.
But so you wanted to know about the procession, and this was in like a circle of, or not a circle, it was like a triangle of cairns. Um, but as I had been passing it in the woods, as I had done a few times before, because it was a landmark for a hiker such as me going through the woods. I suddenly heard a sound that sounded like a pipe organ and a like a silver bell being rung, but like mixed together. But it
Hmm.
had like an octave like fluctuation that sounded like music, but it wasn't like in a traditional musical meter. It was very weird. It was like an oscillation, and I was wondering if it was some kind of industrial noise or something like that. But it sounded like it was right behind me by my ear. Very strange experience. So I kind of just got dizzy and from just that sound. And I was just looking around. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. And then I look in the distance, and there's a procession of beings that look like Predator. Like, it light bending around them, and
Yeah,
they're
I think
humanoid.
the current term for that is glimmerman.
Glimmermen? Is that what it's called now?
Yeah, I mean that's the
That's
term that
crazy.
I've most commonly heard referring to things that look cloaked like Predator in the movie.
I gotta look this up now, but yeah, that's what it was. It was just like that. And it was like they were moving kind of like, at the opening of Lord of the Rings, when Sam and Frodo see the wood elves. It
Mhm.
was like that, but they weren't singing, it was that noise. And then they were just moving in a procession, slowly. Like, and then it looked like they looked over, got pissed that I saw them, and it stopped. And that's all that I have about that. That's what happened.
So what, did
Like,
they just disappear or did they continue on?
they disappeared. They just stopped. Like, I guess it was they looked over, and then there was like movement because it's cloaking. I don't know if that was an arm. I don't know what the fuck that was. But then everything suddenly stopped around that spot. I couldn't see them anymore. They just kind of faded from vision and from sound and all that.
Wow.
And then I had had the same kind of thing before, but this one was without the sound. I had just felt like I was being watched, and I looked up, and in the tree there was again a cloaking creature that had moved from one side of the tree to the other, like it had flown or jumped. And I tried to follow it, and then it disappeared as well. After it seemed to notice that I was following it, I don't understand anything about that whole experience other than nature spirits, man.
Yeah, me personally, I think that they do these sort of things for the sole intent of confusing us because otherwise why would they present themselves in such a way?
It could have been an accident. Like, it might have just been I was at the wrong place at the wrong time and saw something I shouldn't have seen.
Yeah, that does sort of seem to be a recurring theme. Is you're seeing something that's it's presented in such a way where it almost feels haphazard, and the fact that you're able to see it because if they can be invisible all the time, why wouldn't they just be? It might take some sort of energy to make themselves that way, and perhaps when they're being careless, that's when you get that glimpse.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people kind of have similar experiences on very potent psychedelic mushrooms. But you wouldn't I mean, I was sober when this happened, and I haven't been known for psychosis. So, it's not it's not a like a it to me, it was too normal, the circumstances for something odd like that to happen. I wasn't dehydrated. I was just fresh out the house. Like, I had just gone in the woods and just started happening.
So it's
I
pretty reasonable to rule out hallucination.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wasn't even drinking at that time. Like, it was when I was a kid. It's just what happened.
About what time was that?
I was myself about 17. So I guess I wasn't a kid. I was a teenager, but eh, you know. So that was 11 years ago. So that would have been, well, 2011.
Yeah, that's fairly profound. Um,
Or no, that would have been 2000. Sorry. I was actually probably 18 because Williamsburg I was in until 2012, and then we moved up there in 2012. So this was about 2012 or 2013. Sorry.
okay, yeah, no, that is profound because not very many people get a glimpse into. I don't even know what to say about the forest spirits as far as what they're doing and what their purpose is. They present themselves all the time, especially when you talk about things. I consider the Sasquatch to be the same basic sort of entity. It's a forest spirit, right?
I don't know.
Well, it could be.
I almost think that the whole Sasquatch thing, it could be a forest spirit, and a lot of people think that for sure. I'm not saying that isn't, but I think I had mentioned this on another show. What if it's a feral human? Because when animals go feral, they get big and they get hairy. Like for
Hmm.
example, pigs. Uh, a
Or the
lot of the
scrub bull.
right, exactly. And what if it's a feral human?
Well, that doesn't make much sense to me if it's able to cloak itself, as you just described. The Sasquatch are frequently described doing that.
Are
Uh,
they?
uh, and they're, oh, it's certainly, yeah. And they're also frequently described in association with the spook lights or the will o wisp or whatever you might want to call it.
Well, then, yeah, you probably got a nature spirit there. Then.
I mean, that's my supposition. I've never experienced any of this stuff directly, but do I really need to when I've heard so many encounter reports? A couple thousand a year. I'm very very much tuned in as if someone who's listening on their CB scanner. These things are important to me. It's a piece of the puzzle that perhaps I'll never figure out, but at least I'm checking it.
Honestly, I'd kind of rather not figure it out. To me, it's the world's much more interesting if there's things we don't know.
Well, the mystery is what makes it fun, and
Yeah,
the idea of these things being otherworldly or extra dimensional or however you want to spin it, it makes it really fun.
absolutely. I got another story for you.
All right, let's go.
Okay, but it's got a really mundane explanation.
That's fine.
So I had told this one on another podcast too. This is like the last supernatural thing. Other than I could tell you whatever you want. I mean, I got a story that happened during a ritual, but I don't know if that's up the alley of your show.
No, it totally is. First of all, location is a big deal. Obviously, my show is Odd Virginia, so it's the locality of things is kind of the draw. It's not necessarily important, but it's the draw.
Okay, so had a Jersey Devil sighting, and I've tried to explain it by a mundane means, but there's always the option that it could be a Jersey Devil sighting. I worked in Palmerton, Pennsylvania when I was living in the Poconos for a time in about 2015 and 2016, actually. This was 2016. I was working in Palmerton at the ISP that's based out of that town. And it's over by Jim Thorpe. It's super deep in the woods, old mining village. So it's about an hour and a half from the Poconos. And that was my commute. It's hour and a half round trip. So 45 minutes. And that was my commute every day. And I worked one night until 1 a.m. And as I was driving home from Palmerton and I have the exact coordinates of this sighting too. But as I was driving home from Palmerton to Poconos in Stroudsburg, I saw off in the distance, and it was dark, but I saw off in the distance red lights and what looked like just a freaking massive wingspan, like leathery wings that suddenly swooped over my car. And so I immediately slammed on the brakes. There was no one behind me. It's 1 a.m. in the middle of a farmer's field. Like, slammed on the brakes, pulled off to the side of the road, got out of the car. I couldn't see it because it was all black, and it was like black. But I could hear it sounded like a flapping of a tarp. Like it was big, and that's all I have about that story. I mean, not incredibly interesting, but kind of terrifying because it was huge.
No, that's actually is very interesting. And you said something about red lights. Are you talking
Yeah.
about like
So
an eye glow?
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And the only mundane explanation for that sighting, because there's no bats that are that big. This
No.
was the only thing I can think that would come close is black vultures have about 5.5 foot wingspan. And they have been noted on numerous research papers to feed at night during times of famine, or on weather fluctuations. I wouldn't say that this was during a time of a weather fluctuation, but as I was driving, the leather could have been preened wings of a black vulture, and their eyes do reflect red when a light is on them. That's the mundane explanation for that, but it didn't look like that,
So
obviously.
you didn't get a very good view of whatever it was that was approaching.
No, it was just really, really big. Like it to me, 5.5 feet, it kind of makes sense, but to me, looked like it had a wingspan more of 8 feet.
Okay.
There's no birds like that.
Have you ever seen the supposed infrared pictures of the Jersey Devil?
Mm-mm.
It seems to look a lot like a like I don't know, maybe a moose or a caribou, some sort of ungulate, with small bat wings on the back. And whoever took that picture really got a good shot. It's not, clearly defined, but it's not a blob squatch either. Like you can get a pretty good idea of what you're looking at.
Yeah, and of course, naturally, I've lived in that region. That's how it's usually depicted. It's a horse with wings.
Yeah, it,
Uh,
it really did look that way according to the picture that I had seen, and I've heard some accounts on Reddit as well. I like to scour Reddit. Obviously, I found you that way, of people who have seen this thing.
yeah. So, like I said, I don't know what I saw. I could only think must have been a black vulture, but it just seemed too big.
Well, logically, yes, it probably would have been a black vulture because something like that with wings,
Hmm.
especially of the size that I saw depicted, there's no way those wings are carrying that body. Uh-uh.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's to me that seems like the most logical explanation. But like I said, not a very interesting, not a very interesting sighting, but a sighting nonetheless. It's something weird.
It's
Uh,
fun. It's fun to think about for
yeah.
certain.
But that's all my stories. I don't think I've had anything else like I mean, I gave you that document, but that's all I got now.
Those were just exquisite stories. I'm not sure how to interpret them. You've really hit me with something new today, and I've got to thank you for that.
I try to chronicle these things that happen so that, you know, I don't have extremely, frequent. This is all over the course of my whole life. So four things maybe, or three, if you want to count them as that have happened in my life that I'd say are supernatural.
Yeah, I've had about exactly as many. However, what you've got going on is it's just so completely more profound. There are some things, the procession especially, the Glimmermen, as I would say, who are able to seemingly phase out of existence. It's something I've heard a lot about and I wish to experience. And every single time I try to, I can't seem to, I can't find them
Hmm.
wherever they may be. There are hot spots, of course, where these things seem to show up and appear. And I'm starting to feel like this might be something that some people are allowed to see and others are not. And that's kind of also why I'm doing this, because I love the subject matter, but I'm not exposed to it whatsoever, even at my even though that I'm trying to find it.
Well, I think it's also an issue of frequency. This was one thing out of about 3 days a week I'd spend entirely in the woods. So for many years.
Hmm.
So this was one instance out of all that time.
So
It's
what you're saying is more of a probability issue?
Yeah, probably. I mean, like I said, it's probably the wrong place, wrong time. It wasn't that I'm special by any means. It was probably just I was there when it happened because I was in the woods so often.
That does make sense.
Hunters, for example, or I mean, you've seen the of course there's the missing 411 cases, but there's something if you talk to a park ranger, they all seen it because they're in those woods all the time. They've seen stuff.
I'd
It's exact
imagine.
kind of things that I'm talking about. You can't not see it if you're there that long. But like I said, a lot of people don't spend they expect to go in the woods and see Sasquatch on the first run. But people who go hunting for sustenance and for living, they almost never don't see Sasquatch.
Well, that's the funny thing, is that there are so many hunters who will laugh at you if you mention the subject.
Yeah, yeah, because that one, they don't want to seem crazy, and two, um, there's been attempts to stifle,
Oh yeah.
this kind of information. So
Are you familiar with Steve Isdahl at all?
who?
Steve Isdahl. He's a friend of David Paulides and
Mm-mm.
Scott
No, I'm
Carpenter.
not.
Yeah,
Interesting.
he lives in BC, Canada, and he'll talk about this all the time because like BFRO or whatever, they're always trying to discredit him because basically his YouTube channel, he's a hunting guide, right?
Mhm.
He knows about this kind of stuff, and his channel is people email him, and he every single day reads probably 4 or 5 emails of people who have seen these things in the woods, and
Mhm.
he'll upload daily on YouTube, and
Neat.
it's just whoever emails in. It could be falsical emails. It could be people who are just pulling his leg, but whatever it is, he'll read it. and
Interesting. That'd
and
be interesting.
he hates the it's funny to say Sasquatch establishment because it's already a fringe topic, but like there's a Sasquatch establishment of people who are in the know of the subject and who apparently try to suppress anything that would say that it's something other than just a wood ape, right?
Well, and to me, yeah, I had never heard that it was anything but a wood ape. Although I know that there are a lot of things that the cloaking creatures, for example, is something that I've heard others have seen in the national park service. But
Yeah, that I mean that's even counted for on David Paulides's most recent documentary, his second one, which was 411 The Hunted.
yep, I've seen it, and
Yeah.
I knew right away. I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, I know what that
At the
is. I've
end,
seen it.
they talk about the Glimmerman or the cloaked creature. It's like, yeah,
Mhm.
that's that's a normal thing. Dude, more
Glimmermen, you said.
the Glimmerman, more fae folk.
Uh huh.
The more wild you go, the more fae folk we get.
Yeah, that could be the case.
I think that's their habitat, dude. It's just natural forest is what makes them prosper.
Maybe it could also be the a lot of the times a lot of people like to think like the Fae don't like uh people because we settled the land they were already on after we evolved from apes.
Hmm.
So they view us as a source of competition, um, and a source of danger because apparently they're scared of steel, and
Yes, and
that's
iron.
iron and steel. Yeah, that's why you keep a horseshoe over your door. That's where that belief come from.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
well,
it's
honestly, I think that's might be very true.
mhm.
Uh, Considering the fact that in old tradition, there's a lot more of these weird supernatural things.
Well, it
Old
makes me
old stories and folklore. And now that we've civilized a lot of land, people barely believe it.
right, and we kind of disrespect the land and quite a few of our industrial practices, and
Yeah.
it makes me wonder if the reason they tend to manifest near boulder scrambles is if they're trying to keep people away from the metal and the rocks. Like, I wonder if there's a big iron vein under there or something, and they're specifically trying to steer people away from them.
Hmm. Yeah, well, do definitely seem to manifest around those areas. That's a good point.
Yeah, could be an act of protection or something. I don't know. I'm not fake.
One day.
One day.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast, man. I got to get off here. It's been a great conversation. I wish I was more in the headspace to be doing this, but it is what it is. I think it'll turn out to be a great episode anyway, and that's thanks to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good night.
You too, sir. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. So that's it for Michael's stories on this episode. I want to thank Michael again for coming on and sharing those stories because, especially At the time that we had scheduled our interview, I was not in the right headspace to be conducting one. And even though I may have fumbled and stumbled a little bit, Michael picked up that torch and carried it in good faith for me. I really appreciate that, Michael. I loved your stories, and I can't wait to hear from you again. And to all you odd Virginians out there, I was curious. We touched a little bit on the concept of the Glimmer Man in this episode. Go ahead and let me know if you've ever heard of anything similar, if you've ever seen anything similar, or if you have any thoughts on the subject. Personally, I don't know too terribly much of what to make of that, but I do have a quick story to share on that particular topic. Somebody had shared with me in private pictures that they had taken on their property in Ohio, and they said that there were cloaked beings in the pictures. And at first I just looked at them and I said, no, these are just pictures of trees. This is pictures of the woods. But as I look closer, there are definitely physical forms that can be seen that they're darker. It is that kind of predator cloaking look. It's a really weird thing because you have to look twice in order to see it. But once you see it, you can tell it's there. I mean, there were like 4 or 5 different pictures they showed me, and I could definitely make out some sort of upright humanoid figure, multiple in some frames, that looked like they had light bending around them. It was odd how you could sort of tell that something was there, but being able to still see through it. So yeah, I don't know what to make of all that. I just think it's plain fun and crazy. But thanks everyone for tuning into this episode. Don't forget, if you're into story narrations or audiobooks or anything like that, Call of Cthulhu will be up as narrated by me on February 1st, and our next episode of On Virginia will be up on February 4th. Have a great evening, everyone, and I'll see you next time.